A sexual predator is prowling the streets of East London.
You have a violent male on the loose.
Detectives believe the same man who attacked and killed Michelle is also responsible for at least 2 serious sexual assaults in the same area.
These offences have taken place almost to the day, a month apart. Are we then expecting another attack?
We can see the offender getting more and more confident in the crimes becoming even more brutal.
You have to use everything in your armoury to try and find that person.
The crime scene will unlock the case.
The body becomes its own crime scene. DNA evidence can be very powerful.
We don't know who's done this. Look at your neighbour or somebody you work with and think, could this person be here?
I know she's up there and she's going to help everyone trace this man.
Science has yet again proved who the killer is.
One of the most violent, dangerous people that London has ever seen.
East London at dawn. A dog walker calls police to a playground.
The officers who attended discovered that there was a female in the child's playground, lying on her back. She was mostly naked, and what they could see was a lot of blood, a lot of bruising. It was quite clear that that person had unfortunately deceased. The victim of what would appear to be a very, very brutal attack. The officers then, their main focus is to get that scene preserved, ready for those specialists to come in and start the forensic analysis.
The body becomes its own crime scene. The best method really would be to get a pathologist. I would immediately have been thinking around taking samples from the body in situ, trying to look at any trace evidence that might be on her body.
The team observes injuries to the woman's face and neck.
There is significant bruising, scratches, blood on her hands, blood close by. They've been beaten quite severely. And almost you could see then that within the hands that they're trying to scrape away and trying to protect themselves.
ID found on the woman leads police to believe she's 35-year-old Michelle Samara Weira.
Because it was my daughter's birthday the following week, I was making daisy chains, like out of coloured bits of paper, like pastel colours. And I was doing this until the early hours of the morning. And then I went to sleep. And then I got a phone call.
On the line is Anne and Michelle's older sister.
It was like, we need to get to Mum's. The police want to see us. And I was like, oh my God, it's Michelle, isn't it? What's happened? And then she said, she's dead, she's been murdered. I was shaking.
It's devastating news to give to a family. It never gets easier, but you're there to work for that family as hard as you can to find justice for that person.
At the scene, the body is sent to the mortuary for post-mortem.
The pathologist indicated there had been some interference with the normal course of breathing. This may well have been done by the offender from behind. Was she trying to remove maybe a ligature around her neck or a pair of hands around her neck? So is there a mixture of DNA under those fingernails?
One of the things that you must consider straight away is that there may have been some sort of sexual assault taking place. Movement of the body could disturb forensic evidence that you have, and that some of this forensic evidence could be very minute and not very visible to the naked eye.
If there's been some kind of sexual contact, intimate swabs would be fast-tracked to the forensic service provider who would analyse them for DNA.
Officers go door to door.
A number of witnesses had heard maybe 3 screams around about 1:30 in the morning. And that's very, very significant. Obviously, they might be something else, but based on what you can see at the crime scene, then those things are more than likely linked. And of course, then that starts to help you formulate your timeline.
Why has she been attacked in this particular area? Quite often with offences like this, you might have an area where the offender has been sat crouched in the bush waiting for someone to come past, so you might have footprints. You'll be looking for any items that have been dropped. In the playground near the body, there was 2 bags of shopping found. These shopping bags may well have come from the victim, but also they could be completely irrelevant, but you have to keep an open mind. Sometimes you can do joint examination on a bag, so you can cut the handles off and submit those for DNA, but then also fingerprint the plastic itself.
The bags contain groceries and a receipt from a petrol station close to the crime scene.
The receipt shows a financial transaction, and so there are opportunities there in shops to find CCTV. That is what you call a really quick win, that you can do things straight away to try and identify that person's movements and then try and watch them on CCTV.
The team pieced together Michelle's final movements. Widowed young, she's in a new relationship. On the night of the murder, she was staying at her boyfriend's.
She had been to see her mother that evening and then had gone on to her boyfriend's afterwards.
When they got back to his flat, a couple of his friends were just outside and they said, "Can we stay here tonight?" They had one drink with this couple and then they went to bed, and Michelle was just like, thinking about this pair, I better go to the shop to get some stuff for the morning. Michelle was very caring, thoughtful. Her partner had fallen asleep. She took a lot of her jewellery off and put it on the windowsill, which she did often.
Police follow up on the petrol station receipt and recover the CCTV.
Fortunately, it has working CCTV, and Michelle can be seen going in at 1 a.m. She makes various purchases, nothing stands out, some sweets and other groceries that she needs. She looked very calm, made her purchases and then left.
She left the door on the latch, which indicated, she was going back. She never returned. Never returned.
Your timeline now is starting to take shape. Hearing those screams, you want to know if there's any cameras or any witnesses in that particular area going up towards the park.
At the mortuary, Anne is asked to formally identify her sister.
It was awful because she was still being forensically examined. You could see that she'd had cuts on her face, but she just looked so peaceful. But it was like, that's something I've got to do. I've got to identify her.
It's very unusual to be murdered by a stranger. You need to understand who surrounds them in their life. And so you look at the family and friends, and you want to naturally eliminate anybody that knows her, in particular looking at boyfriends. He would have to be eliminated from that inquiry, along with the other friends who were staying at that premises.
At the lab, swabs from the scene are fast-tracked.
When the internal swabs are examined, they found evidence that Michelle had been raped. They find a full male profile.
You are able then to eliminate a number of people, friends, family, everybody that you have been told about that as part of Michelle's life.
The profile was loaded onto the National DNA database and it didn't hit against a name.
You are literally looking at somebody who is a complete stranger to the authorities. That's incredibly hard to take as a investigation team. It's very unusual to see somebody go from nothing to this level of violence. So officers would be looking at crimes that have taken place in that area, going back as many months and even years sometimes. What became apparent straight away that there was 2 other very, very violent sexual assaults that had taken place within a stone's throw of that park. So there's a great worry that would start to surface within the investigation team that we need to be, very, very quick in getting this person off the streets.
Her body was found in this children's play area. Police believe she lay here undiscovered for several hours. Detectives now strongly believe the same man who attacked and killed Michelle is also responsible for at least 2 serious sexual assaults in the same area.
Police investigating the murder of 35-year-old Michelle Samara Weira fear there is a violent serial rapist attacking lone women in East London.
It's a very, very disturbing scenario. There has been 2 very, very violent rapes where extreme physical force and beatings have taken place, and very close to where Michelle was found. And so there are similarities there, and that's a great worry for everybody. It starts to give you an indication of the person you might be looking for. Highly dangerous, doesn't really care. You have to get more evidence to actually say this is the same person.
Horrendous crimes have been committed. Those rape scenes would have been fully examined and processed by a CSI. The victim would be taken to a SARC centre, which is a sexual assault referral centre, and the victim will be examined by a forced medical examiner.
The first attack took place 2 months before Michelle's murder.
A 59-year-old female had been followed from a shop, showing similarities to that of Michelle's movements on that day. And she had been followed to her home where, a terrible attack took place. In that offence, that level of violence and also going to somebody's house shows that that person is incredibly dangerous.
If the offender's forced his way into the house, then there's a huge amount of forensic evidence that might be on the front door. What has he touched inside the bedroom, or what has he touched inside the house? In this case, the victim's shirt was ripped off, and CSIs were able to find a button on the floor of the bedroom.
What became evident then is that person had taken that shirt away. This person is, brazen enough to burst into somebody's home, commit these incredibly serious offence, and then take something away as a trophy.
If you're able to find the shirt with the offender, then you're able to link the buttons back to that shirt. Then you can obviously identify that that shirt has come from that crime scene.
Almost exactly a month later, there's another attack close by.
Another incredibly violent attack on a lone female. The person approached her, had a flick knife on them, threatened her and took her to a nearby alleyway where she was subjected to the most horrific sexual assaults. There is every possibility that the same method was used where Michelle could have been threatened with a knife. When it finished, the offender, having ejaculated, wiped himself on the victim's knickers and left them there. This is offending of the highest order.
Stranger rape is extremely rare, and rape outside in a dark alleyway is even rarer than that. About 9% of rapes occur in those circumstances.
The underwear and swabs taken from both women are fast-tracked.
When the swabs are examined, they find a full male profile. The profile was loaded onto the National DNA database, and it didn't hit against a name.
The team compares the unknown profile to the DNA recovered from Michelle. It's a hit.
What we would call in the police a scene-to-scene hit. You don't know who the offender is, but you've got 2 or 3 scenes that are linked. So clearly, looking at the DNA profile, we have a serial rapist. So he's not forensically aware. Either that or he doesn't care.
He wiped himself on her knickers and threw them on the ground. Like, he literally is providing evidence there. There's obviously quite a lot of risk-taking behaviour here, feeling that he's potentially not going to get caught by the police.
These offences have taken place almost to the day, a month apart. And if you are looking at something like this, well, are we then expecting another attack to follow on a month from Michelle's murder?
Having connected the offences by DNA, family liaison officers update Michelle's family.
Wow. It's like, what a pig. You don't just suddenly start doing that. Wow. Who is this person?
All the attacks have taken place within a half-a-mile radius.
They are all very, very close together, and is well known within policing. And when you look at suspects who do these sort of things, that the safe haven is to get home as quickly as possible. And so offences are often committed quite close to that person's house. You are focusing down into that area to think they're probably very, very close to where these attacks have taken place.
He's looking for his victims late at night or in the early hours of the morning. He's following them. He's clearly worked out that there are places that are, without CCTV. He's looking at an alleyway. He's looking at a playground. All areas that are sort of deserted, are dark, and are kind of slightly out of the way of the public view. Women by themselves in quite a vulnerable way. Women who are older than him, who are potentially a bit more defenceless.
Michelle was in a really bad place after her husband died of cancer. She was a grown woman, but still living in her teenage years. She had posters of old pop stars. She was very innocent and childlike.
Michelle and Anne grew up in Woodford, East London, with their parents and 2 older sisters.
We were the only Asian family, even at our school, for years. And it was a very affluent area. Michelle and there was 18 months between us, and we were so close. We were like twins. My mum used to dress us up in the same clothes all the time. We had a nice life at home, or what appeared to be a nice life. We didn't know how other people lived because we weren't allowed to go anywhere. We weren't allowed to have friends over. My mum was really strict. We didn't really talk to other people about it.
From a young age, Michelle battled with her mental health.
Michelle got married in '89 in Sri Lanka. She got married at 16, which is very young. It's very quick. She'd never even had a boyfriend before. It wasn't an arranged marriage or anything. If you look at the picture of Michelle on our wedding day, she didn't look particularly happy to me, not like a woman that's getting married. Everything changed when she got married.
The marriage is volatile.
She became quite introvert. She wasn't the fun girl that she used to be. She never got to live her life. She was still stuck at 16, I'd say. Her story was tragic. Her life was tragic.
Determined Michelle's family will seek justice and fearful of further attacks, police ask the survivors for detailed descriptions of their attacker.
The biggest source of information you can get about an attack is from the victim themselves, those that were obviously lucky to survive the attacks that took place. And they described their attacker as a male of Asian appearance, in his 30s, and around about 5'9".
Working with the women, police create an E-fit of their suspect.
The E-fit image is done by a specialist officer who is essentially an artist who can then, and is trained in getting that information out of the victim. And of course, you are looking at that E-fit within the context of the area from where it is. There is such an urgency to get that E-fit out to the public as quickly as possible.
The E-fit is released to the media.
The E-fit image, unfortunately, is not successful in terms of identifying the suspect in those early stages of the investigation. It's not unusual because, members of the public sometimes can go, well, it looks like that person, but I don't want to cause them any problem by calling the police. And this can put pressure on an SIO and the team because, you want to do the right thing and get this person off the streets. You have a DNA sample, which is unknown one. We don't know who it is. And so there are other things available to an SIO to decide upon at that stage. One of them is what is called mass screening.
The team decides to try and collect DNA from all men fitting the attacker's description in a 1-mile radius of the crime scenes.
Mass screens can be a huge task, and a mass screen is also a voluntary thing, so you're relying on your Asian males coming forward to provide a DNA sample.
There were some 9,000 males fitting that description available to screen and take DNA samples from. This is resource intensive. Obviously, when you have victims of this nature, all that sort of thing is irrelevant to you. You have a violent male on the loose. You have to use everything in your armoury to try and find that person.
With the mass screen underway, Michelle's loved ones insist on laying her to rest.
Police were saying she could be in a freezer or in a mortuary for months until we catch him, and I'm like, hold on, what if you never do? You're going to have to be able to release her body so we can give her a proper Catholic funeral. But her funeral was beautiful. It was a celebration of her life. And, you know, Michelle had her wedding ring on her and her engagement ring. She was in her wedding dress. You don't realise how many people, like, it touches. It was really heart-wrenching.
Michelle's family are determined to get justice.
This man was just walking the streets. Thought, you know what? Someone's got to do something in the family because it's often effective.
I know she's up there and she's going to help everyone trace this man, because that's the sort of thing Michelle would have done. She would have done anything to help anyone who was in a situation, and I know she's going to help put this man behind bars.
2 weeks after the appeal, a woman calls police.
This female, who was 32 at the time, had been found by members of the public in a churchyard, unclothed in the lower part of her body, so badly beaten, her jaw was broken in a number of places. The level of violence was horrendous. She was unconscious, and people were very fearful for her life at that stage. She was taken into hospital and remained unconscious for quite a long time.
The attack took place a month before Michelle's murder, and the woman spent several weeks in hospital recovering.
She had no memory of the sexual assault or even the beating that took place. That would indicate the level of violence was immediate on her, that he rendered her almost unconscious straight away. The only thing she could remember before an attack was that she was being followed by an Asian man.
After seeing media appeals about the murder of Michelle Samara Weera, a woman has bravely contacted the police. She thinks she's been attacked by the same man, less than 500 metres from the murder scene. The team looks for a forensic link.
There's a window of opportunity for collecting potential evidence from a rape victim. When someone's really has been really seriously injured and potentially sexually assaulted, and they're unconscious, you really do need to get their permission to be able to take samples from them.
With the woman too injured to consent, CSIs are undeterred.
They were very quick thinking and recovered the blanket used to protect her when she was recovered in the ambulance.
The blanket is fast-tracked to the lab.
They were able to find a full DNA male profile from some semen that was on the blanket.
The DNA is put through the database.
A DNA profile is obtained for 1 in 1 billion matched to the DNA profile found from the victim, Michelle. So this is clearly the same offender. So you've now got 4 scenes that match, but you don't know who the offender is. There's a clear escalation of violence, so clear indication that this offender is continuing and getting worse and worse.
We can see the offender getting more and more confident in the crimes becoming even more brutal than before. There's obviously quite a lot of risk-taking behaviour here, feeling that he's potentially not going to get caught by the police. They're escalating because he's evading justice at this point.
The media starts calling the offender the E17 Night Stalker.
These sensational headlines spark enormous fear in women and girls to walk around that particular area knowing that this person is still at large. We don't know who's done this, and therefore this could be a person within your community. You know, these attacks have taken place in a very condensed area, which would indicate quite often in these cases that the person lives locally. And you know, it's not uncommon, isn't it, to look at your neighbour or somebody you work with and think, you know, could this person be here? And it's terrifying to think that.
This is an extremely rare occurrence, and I think because it's something that's picked up in the media, and of course this has a really detrimental effect on women in local communities who are worried about walking the streets late at night, who are worried about being outside, are worried about men approaching them.
A defiant group of 100 residents take to the streets of Walthamstow.
They walked Michelle's route that she had taken, the last known steps that she had taken in support of her family.
It was quite nerve-wracking walking through the streets of Walthamstow to that final place. And when we got there, I thought, I'm not alone. Michelle's memory and Michelle's spirit left the world here. Seeing all these women I'd never met before, it was overwhelming, but it's like people will always come together.
Police advise women to be vigilant as they flood the area.
The different things in your toolbox will be an overt presence where you can see police officers giving reassurance to members of the public, the mass screening of people as well, and the publicity that would go around that. But sitting behind that is the covert world of policing, where in this particular case, covert officers, ones that you can't see, ones that are potentially positioned in houses or cars or buildings to try and find this suspect.
3 months on from Michelle's murder, police have collected DNA from 1,100 local men. None match the unknown one profile. But despite fears the attacker could strike at any time, he appears to have vanished.
After the attack and murder of Michelle, the offending stopped. There were no more of these brutal sexual offences on lone females. There was no murders that were linked to it. And of course, as an SIO and as an investigation team, you would think, well, potentially that person has gone somewhere, or they're leaving it for a considerable amount of time until police activity slows down before they start again.
I didn't think he was ever going to get caught, ever. You just have to get on with it. Get on with it as hard as it is.
Murders in London, if they're unsolved, are reviewed on a regular basis. Having that review in place is really important because it helps you have somebody else over your shoulder looking at things that potentially you might have missed as an investigation team, or also looking at things that perhaps you haven't thought about in terms of forensics or CCTV. And this review system goes on forever.
18 months on from the attacks, the team revisits CCTV of Michelle's final movements.
We know that Michelle was inside that petrol station shop at 1 a.m. and we know she left at 1:12 a.m. and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. When that was reviewed, what you could see at 1:06 a.m. is an Asian male enter the shop behind her. He only stayed there for a matter of minutes, didn't purchase anything, and then left. And obviously that's something which is highly significant.
He's seen going into the shop and CCTV, checking Michelle's whereabouts. The fact that he's stalking his victims shows that he has very little respect.
He was watching Michelle. He was in the petrol station at the same time, but it was archived. And I'm like, why was that archived?
The investigation team who were dealing with Michelle's murder clearly overlooked the fact that there could be somebody else inside that shop who may be the suspect. You can't shy away from that. But now what you potentially have is your suspect on CCTV. There is an image of an Asian male who fits the description, so that image is then put out to 60,000 residents. A call then comes in to the police from a person that owns a dry cleaning store in that area. He believes that he can identify the person in the CCTV wearing quite a distinctive jacket is one of his ex-employees. When a call comes in like that to your inquiry, then you naturally become very excited in a way that you think, well, could we finally get him?
The man names him as 24-year-old Aman Vyas, a university graduate from Delhi, India.
It's then everybody up and out we go and let's try and find this person.
Using intelligence, they track Vyas's movements.
The investigation team discovered that this person had left the UK on the 1st of July 2009 on a one-way ticket to India. At that particular time, there was a considerable amount of press interest in this particular case. There's no coincidence that days later that person has fled the country.
Police look up Vyas on the DNA database.
Our man Vyas was not on the database. Now that would be good news for them because there is a potential that he could be unknown one. And so everything they could do to find him now would be their priority.
Police ask the caller to provide a witness statement at the station.
What he does tell the police is this person no longer works for him, but he still employs the brother of this person. He also seizes an opportunity to help the police. And this is where he sees the brother of the potential suspect drink out of a bottle in the work premises. He seizes that bottle and gives it to the police. And this is such an incredible piece of work by that person to help the police. And this is sometimes the luck that you need. What that means for an investigation team is that you have your crime scene sample, which, as we know, is called unknown one. And you need to try and find who unknown one is. And the route you can take that is through familial DNA. You take a DNA sample from a person and put it into the DNA database. This gives you two lists. One list is a potential parent and child of that sample, and one is a sibling.
The team gets clearance to test the water bottle for a man Vyas's brother's DNA and compare it to the DNA from the crime scene.
A water bottle can give you a lot of evidence. You can get fingerprint evidence from where it's been handled, but also around the lip of the water bottle you could get very good DNA evidence, because especially if the water bottle's got a lid on it, that would protect the DNA around the lip. So there is quite a good area, a rough area, that would collect quite good DNA. Also, the fact that it's plastic, the DNA doesn't get absorbed into the surface, so therefore it's easier to swab.
Scientists recover a full male profile. It's confirmed as belonging to Vyas's brother.
Forensic scientists were able to ascertain that there is some kind of link between the DNA sample from the water bottle and the full DNA profile that's been obtained from Michelle. It's not a match, but it's very similar.
When you're in that position where you know who your suspect is, you have him named, everything fits for that person being responsible, you want to get them as quickly as possible. And it's incredibly frustrating when your suspect is not in the country and you cannot get your hands on them. And in Vyas's case, we see that he is travelling all around the world in different places, New Zealand and Singapore.
How do the victims feel, the living victims who've been viciously attacked, and the police know who the offender is, but they can't bring the offenders to justice?
They'll be in a position where they just can't move on. They don't know where he is, they don't know if he's continuing to offend, they don't know what type of life he's having. Meanwhile, we know that these women have had to try and put their lives back together. And at the same time, we have a family who've lost a loved one.
I started to have anxiety attacks. My kids were so young and I had to be strong for them. My mind was kind of all over the place. It's like you're up and down. One minute you're like, I'm going to fight the world, I'm going to save and then the other times I'm like, I can't do it.
Police keep Michelle's family and the other women Vyas attacked updated on any sightings.
I said to him, please, for my mental health, I don't want updates unless you tell me that he's going to be brought back and landed on British soil. And whoever was in charge then gave the order, I want everyone in his family tree to be put on Interpol Red Alert.
More than 3 years after Michelle's murder, Vyas is still on the run.
My dad died on the 21st of June and his funeral was on the 4th of July. And the night before I was like, God, Dad, please show us a sign. It was hours later, I listened to my voicemails and it was our liaison officer saying, "Anne, we've caught him." And I was like, oh my God.
After 2 years on the run, a man Vyas is taken into custody in Delhi.
He went through passport control, flagged up. He was sitting at the boarding gates, ready to get on that flight, and that's where he got arrested. And I just think, wow, you know, that's something that you rarely hear of. But it could have slipped through the net.
Police request a DNA sample from Vyas.
You need their sample to directly compare against unknown one, to take that before a jury, before a court. Well, of course, in India, we can't force him to do that kind of thing, so it was voluntary, and Armen Vyas did not consent to give his DNA.
The team needs him back in the UK. They apply for an extradition.
There are so many excuses that are given by his defence team and himself to avoid being subject to this extradition, such as he's insane, somebody's on holiday, the legal proceedings within extradition hadn't been followed. And of course, you know, this is extremely frustrating. Forget about the police for the second, but how frustrating is that for the victim's family to hear that something which you think would be very, very straightforward has taken such a long time.
I think he had about 50 hearings in the space of that time. People over here, our prime ministers, I think we'd had 3 in that time.
For years, Vyas evades justice.
Worryingly and quite upsetting for many people was that Armen Vyas, whilst in those 8 years, was actually on bail. So he was allowed to go about his normal business. And all these families were captured by the grief that they have over what happened to their loved ones.
7 years ago, Michelle Samara Wira was raped and murdered just round the corner, and her attacker has never been brought to justice.
The community remains determined Michelle will not be forgotten.
We keep faithful, as hard as that is. It's, I think it's probably how I've always coped with a lot of things.
The police never stopped going. No one was ever going to stop until they could bring him back to the UK. And so 8 years later, finally, the extradition was granted. On the 4th of October 2019, 10 years after the attacks on those women, Armen Vyas was brought back to the UK and booked into custody. Now, he's particularly unremarkable looking. You might be expecting to see this monster of a person, but you know what I've learned over the years, it's what's behind the eyes, not in front of them. And I think that's when you can see evil, when you come face to face with these people. This person is beyond evil. You know, looks can be very deceiving sometimes.
At the station, Vyas is booked in and his DNA collected.
The DNA sample that he provided was loaded onto the DNA database.
I can guarantee that people were waiting for that result. Everyone would have been on standby to match that against the unknown one profile from 10 years before.
This DNA sample that was taken from him is a 1 in a billion match.
The reason why scientists give that figure of 1 in a billion is because people can't comprehend a number higher. In fact, it's almost impossible that somebody would share that DNA with you. And it's never happened before. So when you have that match, you know statistically, legally, that you have that person in custody and the right person.
Police charge Vyas for Michelle's rape and murder, the violent attacks on the woman in her home and the woman in the graveyard. But police need more to charge him for the assault on the woman in the alleyway.
The fact that his DNA is on her underwear doesn't necessarily prove the rape. It's really important to try and get her internal swabs, so her intimate swabs, to try and find if there's any DNA on there.
11 years ago, when the rape took place, swabs failed to return a DNA profile.
The officers would then look at the enhancements in DNA that have taken place during those 10 years. DNA moves very, very quickly, and the sensitivity that you can employ on DNA now is vastly different to what it was back then.
When the offences were committed, we were looking at 10 regions of the DNA, and then when he was arrested and actually charged, we were then looking at 17 regions of the DNA profile. So we were able to rework this sample, and it came back as a much better identification of 1 in 70,000, which means 1 in 70,000 people may have that same DNA profile, which isn't as good as a 1 in a billion, but it's good supporting evidence, particularly when you've got the DNA on her knickers as well. DNA evidence can be very powerful, especially in a court.
Vyas is charged with a third count of rape. But despite the forensics, at his hearing he pleads not guilty on all charges.
He's denying that these crimes were rape. He's still claiming that these were consensual acts, and he seems to show very limited remorse right the way through into the end.
Each victim sustained such a beating, to a level of violence which, for 3 people only fell short of killing them, is a very difficult thing for people to believe that anything in these acts was consensual.
To look at him, you would not think that he would be capable of committing those kind of violent crimes. He doesn't care. He really thought he was going to get found not guilty. I've seen him at the trial every day. Seen him on the stand lying heinous lies about these women. How disgusting. Awful.
The jury delivers their verdict.
This is a very emotionally charged time for a family, and the police also want that more than anything else. They want the right decision to be made, and you want to make sure that when that time comes that the jury have gone out, that you have done everything you can.
It was nerve-wracking, but I'd had my eyes shut for ages and I was shaking, and it was guilty, guilty, guilty. And then I don't even know what happened. I think I had an out-of-body experience.
Vyas is sentenced to a minimum of 37 years behind bars.
Is a real sense of relief. Science has yet again proved who the killer is in the crime scene.
Michelle has made a difference. She was the guardian angel for all the other victims, because a lot of rape victims, the conviction rate is so low. All of the other victims are really brave.
The courage they showed when they gave evidence, is so admirable. There's no word to describe. They did it with one common purpose, and that is to put Vyas behind bars, one of the most violent, dangerous people that London has ever seen.
Since the trial, I've been in limbo because I'm lost. I feel lost. The futility of it all. He's sitting in a prison, being fed and watered, and he's got a privilege, after all the things that he's done. It's the people left behind that suffer. He's not suffering.
1 in 3 women are subjected to physical or sexual violence.
A lot of the women are angry. Why should a woman not be able to walk down the road, whether she's vulnerable or not?
It's a crime against women in general, because it's making women feel that they can't be safe in their communities.
This has come to the forefront in the most recent of years. But obviously this shows you in 2009 the same thing had happened. This has been going on for such a long time.
Women should be able to walk the streets anywhere. Michelle was just so innocent. She was very genuine and caring and loving. She was like an angel, really. My mum died. She died in 2018. I would have liked to have seen him get justice while she was alive, but they're all up there now and they're all together.